Welcome to this explainer. We've all seen them, right? Those viral headlines and romanticized clickbait articles flooding our social feeds, promising a sun-drenched, rustic life in Europe for literally pennies. The pitch is almost always the same: a picturesque, lush Sicilian hillside, dramatic golden hour lighting, and the ultimate fantasy of just escaping the modern rat race. It sounds like an absolute fairy tale. But today, we're pulling back the curtain. We're going to look way past that cinematic, internet-crafted illusion to uncover a much darker, far more profound global reality. We're stripping away the bright, cheerful fantasies to examine the tense, unvarnished truth of what's really happening in these ancient, crumbling towns.
Okay, let's dive into this. €1. Just consider that stark price tag. Let the sheer impossibility of that number hang in the air for a second. €1. That's what you might drop into a toll booth. It's what you might find lost in the cushions of your couch. Yet somehow, this is the asking price for centuries-old real estate right in the heart of the Mediterranean. When a price tag is this unimaginably low, it's not a golden opportunity. It is a distress signal.
And that brings us to the absolutely critical question of this entire explainer: why is a house cheaper than a cup of coffee? Seriously, think about the economics and, more importantly, the human reality behind that. What terrifying set of circumstances, what underlying tragedy has to exist for a stone home in a lush village to be sold for pocket change? A house is meant to be a shelter, a generational asset, a home. When it gets devalued to the price of a cheap espresso, it means the very lifeblood of the community surrounding it has just vanished. To really understand why this is happening, we have to transition away from the internet fantasy and confront the harsh physical reality of these structures.
Section 1. The reality of decay.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark, almost violent contrast between the internet's promise and the actual ground truth. You have the dream of a rustic Italian villa on a lush hillside. But then there's the reality. You aren't buying a charming fixer-upper here. You are buying a decaying, completely abandoned shell. We are talking about peeling paint, cracked plaster walls that have been exposed to the harsh elements for decades, and rusted, broken wooden shutters just hanging loose from their hinges. That thick, overgrown ivy, it isn't just quaint decoration, it's literally crawling up the stone, slowly reclaiming the architecture straight back into the earth. If you peer through those cracked, dusty windows, you don't see a future home. You see a faded, forgotten interior. It's gritty, it's caked in dust, and it requires a monumental amount of capital just to make it structurally safe enough to stand inside. But you know what? The crumbling architecture is just a symptom. The real crisis isn't happening to the buildings.
Section 2. The demographic collapse.
Let's shift our focus to the much darker root cause: the complete and utter absence of human life. The crucial point here is how this collapse manifests in the daily life of these towns. Look at the symptoms of this collapse. This isn't just a quiet Sunday afternoon. It is a permanent ghost town vibe. You walk down these narrow, shadowed cobblestone alleys and every single shop shutter is pulled down and rusted shut. The commerce is totally dead. The sunlit piazzas, which for centuries were the beating heart of social life, are completely empty. And honestly, the most haunting detail? The solitary elderly residents. You might see a single older man in weathered clothing, sitting alone on a worn wooden bench, surrounded by long shadows and total silence. There is a deep, melancholic isolation here. The community is completely fractured, leaving behind only those who are too old to leave.
To really grasp the gravity of this, just picture this scene in your mind. A weathered metal swing creaking and swaying in a cold wind, dry autumn leaves scattering across cracked concrete under a soft, overcast light. The school playground is completely, utterly empty. No shouts, no laughter. The desaturated, rusty details of this abandoned childhood space heavily underline what economists call a demographic winter. A town without children is literally a town without a future. The silence in these playgrounds is absolutely deafening, and it tells the true story of the €1 house much more accurately than any real estate brochure ever could. Because if the playgrounds are empty and only the elderly remain, where did the missing generations go? Why are these ancient villages dying?
Section 3. An exodus of youth.
The process of abandonment isn't some sudden overnight event. It's a slow, agonizing bleed. Step 1. The youth of the town, facing absolutely zero economic opportunities, find themselves waiting on quiet, dimly lit train platforms with worn suitcases. Step 2. They board those trains, departing through steam and mist, heading toward modern, hazy, industrialized hubs like Milan or Rome, searching for work, education, and a modern life.
And finally, step 3 brings the consequence. The crumbling medieval hilltop villages in the Sicilian mountains are left entirely to the wind, the storm clouds, and the dust. It is a heartbreaking brain drain and labor drain that leaves these epic ancient landscapes completely abandoned to the elements.
Section 4. A global warning. And this brilliantly illustrates a much larger, frankly terrifying macroeconomic trend.
We can actually connect these dots right across the globe. In rural Italy, as we've seen, it's the crumbling medieval hilltops and dust-blown rooftops, but move your eyes down to the countryside of Japan. Over there, you find silent, deserted villages sitting under a thin, rolling mist. It's the exact same phenomenon, just on a totally different continent. And across broader rural Europe, from Spain to Eastern Europe, you find fog-covered, empty streets. The cool, desaturated reality is that rapid urbanization and plunging birth rates are hollowing out rural communities worldwide. The €1 house is really just the Italian mascot for a massive global demographic shift that is leaving thousands of historic communities to rot. As we synthesize all this information, we reach the inevitable, highly somber conclusion of this trend.
Section 5. The fading light.
We are literally looking at the fading light of centuries-old civilizations. Just imagine an ancient village as dusk falls. For hundreds of years, as the deep indigo night sky settled in, these hillsides would twinkle with hundreds of warm window lights, representing hundreds of families, warm hearths, and continuing human lineages. But now, because of this demographic winter, those lights are extinguishing, one by one. A cold wind rustles the trees, and the village slowly fades into near darkness. Tonight, maybe only a single dim glow remains in a town that once housed thousands. It is a profound, physical extinguishing of life and memory.
And that leaves us with this final, chilling thought to ponder. When that single, remaining dim glow finally goes out, when the last elderly resident leaves or passes away, what happens to the history, the culture, and the centuries of human triumph and tragedy left in the dark? The €1 house isn't a real estate bargain, folks. It's a tombstone for a vanishing way of life. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the headlines, and I'll see you in the next one.